was close to midnight when Allison's aging sedan sputtered on a Highway 6, the rain falling in slick curtains across her windshield. She had been driving for 9 hours, and her eyes burned with fatigue. The GPS flickered, briefly losing signal in the storm, leaving her unsure if she had missed her exit. With the next town still 30 miles away and her gas gauge flirting with empty, the neon flicker of a roadside sign caught her eye. Vacancy, Westridge Motel. The sign's hum felt unnervingly loud against the pounding rain. She wasn't eager to stop at an unfamiliar place in the middle of nowhere, but exhaustion outweighed caution. The motel appeared like a forgotten relic, its cracked asphalt parking lot gleaming wet under flickering security lights. 2 cars sat in the lot, a rusty pickup with a broken taillight and a silver sedan coated in grime. Allison parked close to the lobby and hesitated before stepping into the rain. The air smelled faintly of mildew and gasoline. As she approached the glass door, she noticed a security camera overhead, its lens obscured by a smear of dirt, as if someone had intentionally wiped a greasy palm across it. Inside, a lone clerk, a wiry man with thinning hair and unnervingly pale eyes, waited behind the counter. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "All by yourself tonight?" the clerk asked casually, sliding a tarnished brass key across the counter. The question felt more probing than polite. Allison forced a laugh and nodded, not wanting to reveal any vulnerability. The lobby smelled of stale cigarettes masked poorly by lemon cleaner. Behind the clerk, a row of brass mail slots was mounted on the wall. Only 3 had keys. The others were empty, their absence strangely noticeable. She took the key and walked toward room 7, her boots squeaking on the cracked linoleum. As she passed the vending machine, she noticed several snack bags torn open, their contents missing, as if someone had ripped them apart impatiently. Room 7 was a disappointment. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and a single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The bedspread smelled faintly of damp earth. When she pulled back the curtains, the view offered nothing but a patch of woods and the faint glow of the sign out front. She thought she saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees, but when she blinked, it was gone. She told herself it was just the rain and her tired mind playing tricks. She locked the door, double-checked it, and even shoved a chair under the knob. Just as Allison began to drift off, a faint scratching sound pulled her back to awareness. It was subtle, like fingernails against wood, coming from the direction of the bathroom wall. She held her breath, straining to hear. The sound stopped, then returned, this time louder. She flicked on the bedside lamp, her heart thudding in her chest. The room was silent again, until a low creak sounded from outside her door, as if someone were shifting their weight in the hallway. She checked the peephole, but saw only the empty corridor bathed in sickly yellow light. And then, just as she stepped back, a whisper seemed to breathe her name. Allison barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, the whisper she thought she heard replayed in her mind, as clear as if someone had been inches from her ear. By 3 a.m., the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside unnervingly still. The motel's silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere outside her window. She sat up in bed, debating whether she should just grab her things and leave. But the nearest gas station was miles away, and her fuel tank was too low to risk it. Her only choice was to wait out the night and leave at first light. She tried distracting herself by scrolling through her phone, but the signal was gone. Only an empty, no service stared back at her. That's when the scratching began again, this time from the corner where the bathroom wall met the floor. It was slow, deliberate, like something dragging a nail across plaster. Allison froze, listening. Then, 3 faint knocks echoed through the pipes beneath the sink, steady, spaced out, like a pattern. The sound stopped abruptly, but a faint whisper, muffled, unintelligible, seemed to seep through the wall. Goosebumps prickled along her arms, mustering courage. Allison crept toward the bathroom and flicked on the light. The cracked tiles glowed under the yellow bulb, and for a moment, everything seemed ordinary. She crouched down, pressing her ear to the cold wall. A faint shuffling, too deliberate to be rodents, moved behind the plaster. She stood quickly, her breath shallow. On instinct, she opened the bathroom door wider, and the hinges groaned loudly. That groan was answered, somewhere down the hallway, by another creak, like footsteps mimicking her movements. Heart pounding, she checked the peephole again. The corridor was empty, but the fluorescent light outside room 7 flickered once, then again, slower this time, as if responding to her presence. In the momentary darkness between flickers, she could have sworn she saw a shadow farther down the hall, hunched and angular, before the light returned to steady yellow. She stepped back from the door and grabbed her jacket, deciding that staying in the room felt more dangerous than venturing outside. As she turned toward her bag, a low thud reverberated through the wall behind the bed, followed by another whisper, louder now, though still distorted. This time, she could make out part of the word, Allison. The sound of her name, stretched and warped, sent a jolt of icy fear down her spine. Without thinking, she yanked the chair away from the door, unlocked it, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor smelled faintly of wet earth, and the silence was absolute. The doors of the other rooms were shut tight, but she had the gut-wrenching sense that someone, or something, was no longer behind the walls, but somewhere very, very close. The night air outside the motel was cold and damp, carrying the sharp scent of wet asphalt and pine. Allison stepped out cautiously, her boots squelching slightly on the soaked pavement. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly behind her, its light flickering like a heartbeat. She scanned the parking lot. Still the same 2 cars, still no sign of life. But something felt off. The forest at the edge of the property, dark and dense, seemed to breathe, its trees shifting subtly even though there was no wind. For the first time since arriving, Allison felt truly alone and watched. She clutched her phone out of habit, though it still showed no service, and made her way toward her car. Her breath clouded in the air, illuminated by the motel's dying lights. She reached for the door handle but stopped. Her driver's side window was fogged from the inside, streaked with what looked like finger trails dragged across the glass. Allison's heart skipped. She hadn't been in the car since she'd parked. The realization tightened her chest. Someone had been inside. A faint crunch of gravel made her spin around. At first, there was nothing, just the parking lot and the silent motel rooms. Then, from somewhere near the trees, came the soft but unmistakable sound of footsteps. They weren't hurried, but deliberate, spaced apart just enough to signal intent rather than wandering. She squinted toward the tree line, her eyes straining against the darkness. The footsteps stopped. Then, a single twig snapped. The sound seemed too close now, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there had stepped forward deliberately to let her know they were real. Panicked, Allison darted back to room 7, fumbling with the key. The brass felt icy in her trembling fingers as she unlocked the door and shoved it closed behind her. She locked it, wedged the chair back under the knob, and backed toward the bed, her chest heaving. The motel room felt even smaller now, the shadows heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. The scratching returned, but this time from the ceiling, faint and rhythmic. She tilted her head upward and listened. Drag, drag, pause. Like something crawling slowly above her, the fluorescent light flickered violently, plunging the room into momentary darkness before returning. In that brief blackout, she thought she saw a shape in the corner, a hunched, too tall silhouette, motionless but unmistakable. When the light steadied again, the corner was empty. Her heart thundered. She whispered to herself that she was imagining things, but when she glanced at the bathroom door, it was ajar even though she'd closed it. A faint fog seeped out across the tiles, and as she stared, she realized it wasn't fog at all. It was breath, curling softly into the room. Allison sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone like a lifeline even though it still displayed no service. Her breathing had slowed, but every sound, the faint ticking of the radiator, the occasional groan of the building settling, felt amplified and threatening. She considered running outside again, but the memory of the fogged window and the footsteps in the dark held her in place. She tried convincing herself that the breath-like mist had been a trick of the light or the remnants of steam from the bathroom pipes. But deep down, she knew better. Something was inside the motel, or maybe inside the walls, with her. Then came a sound that was entirely new, a muffled thump from the room next door. She'd assumed all the other rooms were vacant. The parking lot hadn't suggested otherwise. But this sound was deliberate, like someone dropping something heavy on the floor. Allison froze. staring at the wall that separated her from room 8. Another thump followed, softer, then a scraping noise, as though something was being dragged across the carpet. She pressed her ear against the wall, holding her breath. At first, there was only silence, and then, a faint, wet cough, heart racing. Allison pulled back and crept to her door, peering through the peephole. The hallway was deserted. The light above room 8 flickered twice before steadying again. She considered knocking on the door to ask if someone was hurt, but quickly dismissed the thought. Something about the sound of that cough had been wrong. Too strained, almost animalistic. Instead, she slid her shoes back on, determined to see if anyone else was awake. Maybe she could at least confirm that she wasn't the only living soul here. The hallway's carpet squished damply underfoot as she stepped out, and the air smelled faintly of iron now, sharp and unpleasant. She approached room 8 and hesitated, listening. It was silent, too silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. She reached for the doorknob but stopped when she noticed something unsettling. Deep scratch marks around the lock, as if someone had tried repeatedly to force their way inside. Before she could react, the faint sound of footsteps echoed again, this time from farther down the hall, closer to the lobby. Allison backed away, her pulse quickening, and turned toward the lobby's glow. But halfway there, a new sound rose, a soft, rhythmic knocking coming from behind room 8's door. Knock, pause, knock, knock. The pattern was deliberate, like a code. She stepped back instinctively, and just as she did, the door handle twitched once, then again, harder, as if someone, or something, inside was testing its strength. The air grew heavier, colder. Somewhere behind her, faint but distinct, came the whisper again. Allison. Allison stood trembling in the hallway, the faint glow of the lobby behind her and the ominous door of room 8 ahead. The handle had gone still, but the memory of its twitching sent fresh chills through her body. Her instincts screamed to run back into her room and barricade the door, but another part of her, the part desperate for answers, pulled her closer. She took a cautious step toward room 8 and crouched, her fingers brushing against the damp carpet. The knocking had stopped, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like pressure against her ears. She leaned toward the keyhole, peering through. At first, she saw only darkness. But then, after her eyes adjusted, a faint shape emerged, a sliver of movement, like someone's shoulders shifting just out of view. She held her breath. Then, unexpectedly, a single bloodshot eye darted into view on the other side of the keyhole, staring directly at her. Allison gasped and stumbled backward, her heart hammering so violently she could barely think. The door rattled once, violently, but then stopped. The hallway seemed to stretch around her, every shadow deepening. She spun and bolted toward the lobby, her shoes slipping slightly on the damp carpet. The fluorescent lights above her flickered in erratic patterns as if the motel itself was aware of her fear. When she reached the front desk, the pale clerk was gone. The little bell on the counter had been knocked to the floor, and behind the desk, a single key, room 8's, was missing from its slot. Allison's breath caught. She called out a tentative hello, but her voice sounded small in the empty lobby. Only the hum of the neon sign outside answered. The phone behind the desk caught her attention. She snatched up the receiver, hoping for a landline connection, but when she placed it to her ear, there was no dial tone, only a faint, distorted static. Then, through the static, a whisper threaded its way through, "Don't open it." The voice was warped, genderless, and so faint she wasn't even sure she'd heard it correctly. The line went dead with a sharp click. Allison replaced the receiver with shaking hands. Her pulse thundering in her temples, she turned back toward the hallway leading to room 8, her mind torn between terror and the urge to escape. But as she glanced toward the entrance, she froze. The front door of the motel, which had been wide open when she arrived, was now bolted shut from the inside. The silver sedan and rusty pickup in the lot outside were gone. Only her car remained, sitting lonely under the flickering sign. And then, from the hallway behind her, the knocking began again, louder this time, faster, as if whatever was inside room 8 was growing impatient. The pounding from room 8 became so loud and frenzied that the walls seemed to vibrate. Allison stumbled backward from the hallway, her pulse racing as she scanned the lobby for anything that might help. Her gaze landed on a heavy metal flashlight near the fallen bell. She snatched it up, clutching it like a weapon. The bolted front door gleamed dully under the flickering light, its thick steel lock mocking her desperation. She yanked at the bolt, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't jammed. It was as if someone had welded it shut. She turned toward the windows beside the lobby entrance, thinking she could smash one and crawl through, but the moment she approached, her breath caught. Beyond the glass, the parking lot wasn't empty anymore. Several dark figures now stood scattered around her car, motionless and faceless in the neon glow. They weren't close enough to make out details, but their heads were all turned toward her. As she watched, one of them slowly raised a hand, not to wave, but to press it against the glass of the window in front of her. She stumbled back in shock, and the pounding from room 8 abruptly stopped. The silence was deafening. She could hear her own ragged breathing and the faint buzzing of the neon sign. Then, a new sound emerged, the soft creak of a door opening. Not room 8 this time. The sound had come from farther down the hall, where room 10's door stood ajar. Allison's flashlight beam trembled as she pointed it toward the darkness of the corridor. The air felt colder now, as if something had been let in or let out. She could see faint boot prints leading from the lobby into the hall, wet and muddy, but they stopped halfway as if whoever made them had simply vanished. Desperation overcame caution. Allison sprinted back toward her room, thinking maybe she could use the bathroom window to escape. The motel's hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly, and her footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if the walls were amplifying them. When she reached room 7, she slammed the door shut behind her and locked it, her chest heaving. The room looked subtly different, like the furniture had been shifted an inch to the left. The bathroom door was closed again, even though she'd left it ajar when she fled earlier. And there, on the damp bedspread, lay her brass key. Though she'd taken it with her to the lobby, a faint scraping began above her again, dragging slowly across the ceiling. She backed into the corner, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. Then she noticed something horrific. On the inside of the bathroom door, faintly written in condensation, were the words, "Don't trust the windows." Her breath caught. The message hadn't been there before. The room seemed to tighten around her as another knock, slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud, came from the bathroom itself. The air turned icy, her breath visible in the beam of her flashlight. She realized, with a sinking certainty, that whatever was after her wasn't outside anymore. It was already in the room with her. The bathroom door loomed like a sealed vault, the faint message on its surface glistening in the dying light of the flickering bulb. Allison's fingers trembled as she tightened her grip on the flashlight. Every rational part of her screamed to flee the room, but her body wouldn't respond. Her legs rooted in place, her breath shallow. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, and closer now, as though the thin wooden door were the only thing separating her from something vast and merciless. The silence afterward was worse than the sound itself, heavy and suffocating. She took a tentative step toward the door, her boots whispering against the carpet. Her flashlight beam cut a shaky path across the room, catching the peeling wallpaper and the stained curtains. She reached out, pressing her palm lightly against the bathroom door. It was ice cold, so cold it burned. She could feel the faintest vibration beneath her fingertips, like a heartbeat too slow to belong to anything human. Another faint whisper slithered through the door, but the words were distorted, as though coming from underwater. Steeling herself, she twisted the knob. It resisted at first, as though something on the other side were holding it closed. But then, with a sudden give, it turned, and the door creaked open a few inches. A sharp gust of air hit her face, damp, earthy, and smelling faintly of decay. She raised the flashlight and pushed the door wider. The bathroom beyond looked unchanged. Cracked tiles, a fogged mirror, and a sink that dripped with agonizing slowness. But when she looked closer, she saw it. A long, jagged crack in the back wall of the shower, barely visible under the peeling tile. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing unnaturally in the small space. The crack wasn't just damage. It was an opening, narrow but deep, leading into utter darkness. As she leaned closer, the flashlight beam revealed faint scratch marks around the edges of the gap, as if something had clawed its way out. A faint, low moan drifted from the darkness beyond, a sound that vibrated in her bones. Allison stumbled backward, slamming her shoulder into the sink. The faucet sputtered suddenly, spitting out a single drop of water that landed with a sharp plink, impossibly loud in the tense silence. Behind her, the bathroom door swung shut with a force that rattled the walls. The knob locked itself with a decisive click. Allison spun, pounding on the door, but the motel beyond was silent. No footsteps, no voices, not even the faint hum of the neon sign. She turned back toward the crack in the shower wall. Something shifted inside that darkness, a slow, deliberate movement. Then a hand, pale and unnaturally long-fingered, slid out of the gap, curling against the tile. It moved with a terrible slowness, as though savoring the moment. Allison's scream caught in her throat as a second hand appeared, gripping the edge of the opening. The pale hands gripped the edge of the crack, their knuckles bending in unnatural angles as if the bones inside didn't match the shape of a human skeleton. Allison pressed herself flat against the sink, her flashlight shaking wildly. The creature's fingers flexed, scraping against the tiles with a shrill, glassy sound that set her teeth on edge. Slowly, something began to emerge, shoulders first, impossibly narrow, then a torso that seemed to shimmer faintly, as if it weren't fully solid. Its skin was translucent in places, revealing veins that glowed faintly blue beneath the surface. The thing's head followed, ducking low to squeeze through the gap. Its face, or what might have once been a face, was sunken and hollow, with deep black sockets where eyes should have been. But even without eyes, Allison could feel its gaze on her, cold and piercing. It paused on the threshold, as if savoring her fear, and the air in the room grew colder. The mirror behind her fogged again, and faint words appeared on the glass. "Stay very still." She didn't know if she could trust the message or if it was another trick. Allison held her breath and stood perfectly still, gripping the flashlight so hard her knuckles ached. The creature slid fully into the bathroom, its movements both fluid and jerky, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Its hollow sockets scanned the room slowly, and for a moment, it seemed not to notice her. Its long fingers traced the walls, leaving faint trails of moisture wherever it touched. When its hand brushed against the mirror, the letters smeared and vanished. The thing tilted its head, listening. A faint noise, distant footsteps echoing through the motel, seemed to catch its attention. It turned slowly toward the door, its body folding and unfolding like a shadow slipping across water. Allison dared to exhale, silently praying it would leave. But then the creature froze, its head snapping back toward her. Though it had no eyes, she felt the weight of its attention settle directly on her. A sound like a dry hiss escaped its hollow mouth, a noise that made the hairs on her arms stand straight. The bathroom door swung open suddenly, by no force of hers, and the hallway stretched out beyond, impossibly dark. The creature lunged, but not at her. It darted into the hall with impossible speed, its limbs bending in impossible ways as it disappeared into the shadows. Allison's legs finally moved, propelling her out of the bathroom and toward the hallway. The motel corridor seemed endless now, its lights flickering wildly. From somewhere far ahead came the sound of splintering wood and the distant, anguished cry of a man. Someone else was here, and the hollow thing had found them. Allison bolted into the corridor, her shoes squeaking on the damp carpet. The flickering lights stretched out in both directions, but ahead, the hallway seemed impossibly long, as if the building had grown overnight. The anguished cry she'd heard moments before echoed again, muffled now, distorted by the motel's warped acoustics. It sounded like a man begging for help, though the words were indistinct. She gripped the flashlight tighter and started forward, telling herself that finding another living person was her best shot at survival. As she ran, doors on either side of the hall flickered in and out of existence. One moment, she passed a door marked 12, the next it was gone, replaced by bare, peeling wallpaper. The floor beneath her feet seemed to sink slightly with every step, like she was running across a sponge instead of solid ground. Her flashlight beam trembled as it swept over the walls. There were no windows, no signs of the lobby or exit, only more hallway, stretching endlessly ahead. Somewhere far behind, the sound of scratching on plaster returned, growing louder and faster. The door ahead suddenly swung open on its own. Warm yellow light spilled into the hallway, bathing the floor in a glow that felt out of place among the flickering fluorescence. "Help!" A man's voice called from inside. It was strained and breathless, tinged with panic. Allison approached slowly, her every instinct warning her not to go in. She peered around the doorframe. The room beyond looked like an ordinary motel room, but the shadows inside seemed too deep, swallowing the corners. On the bed sat a man in a wrinkled button-up shirt, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Please," he rasped, gesturing frantically. "Close the door. It's coming." She stepped inside hesitantly, and the moment she did, the hallway outside shifted. The walls groaned as though alive, and the doorway seemed to stretch farther away. The man stood, wobbling, and pointed to the bathroom. "It comes through the cracks," he whispered. "Through the walls. It's been here for years." His eyes darted to the door nervously. Then, in a voice barely audible, he said, "Don't trust what you see. It wears our faces." Before Allison could respond, a loud thud shook the wall behind the bed, followed by a wet tearing sound, like fabric being ripped underwater. A second later, the man's face twisted, not in pain, but in a way that seemed unnatural, as though invisible strings were pulling his features into a grotesque smile. His eyes turned a flat, lifeless black. Allison staggered back, the reality sinking in. This wasn't a survivor. The hollow thing had learned a new trick. The man, or the thing wearing him, lurched forward with jerky movements, and Allison lunged for the door, realizing she'd walked right into its trap. Allison's fingers slipped on the doorframe as she sprinted back into the hallway. Behind her, the man-shaped hollow thing's heavy, uneven footsteps scraped against the carpet, the sound too wet to be human. The hallway twisted again, narrowing as though the walls themselves were closing in. She didn't dare look back. Every instinct screamed that to glance behind would slow her just enough for it to catch her. Her lungs burned as she ran, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness in wild arcs. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard the front desk bell ring once, sharp and mocking. The corridor split into two directions, left and right, though she was sure there hadn't been a junction before. She turned right, skidding across the damp carpet, and found herself staring at the lobby, but something was wrong. The furniture was melted, slumped into strange, organic shapes, and the front door now stretched impossibly tall, its bolt locked high above her reach. Her own reflection flickered briefly in the lobby's broken mirror, only for her face in the reflection to blink at her independently, smiling. Allison stumbled back, dread coiling in her gut that a sudden crash behind her signaled the hollow thing's approach. Its pale hands scraped the walls, leaving trails of darkness that oozed and pulsed like liquid shadow. Allison spun and spotted a maintenance hatch low on the far wall, barely visible under a warped staff-only sign. She lunged for it, wrenching it open with desperate strength. A draft of cool, damp air rushed out. Without hesitating, she crawled inside, dragging the hatch closed just as the creature's fingers slapped against the frame. Its hiss followed her into the crawl space, echoing in the narrow darkness. The crawl space was a maze of pipes and exposed beams, and every turn felt identical. The flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as if the motel itself was leeching the light away. Behind her, distant scrapes and whispers grew louder, too many to belong to a single creature. It wasn't alone. Panic clawed at her chest as she crawled faster, following a faint glow ahead. The air grew fresher with each movement, no longer thick with mildew but tinged with the smell of wet pine. Finally, she reached another gap in the wall, a jagged crack like the one in her bathroom, and through it, she could see trees swaying under a starless sky. Allison forced herself through the crack, tumbling onto damp grass outside. The motel loomed behind her, but now it looked impossibly small, as though it had been shrinking the entire time. Its neon sign flickered weakly, and for a heartbeat, the building seemed to pulse like a living thing. A whisper brushed her ear, "We'll follow." But when she turned, the forest was silent and empty. She staggered toward her car, which sat waiting under the faint glow of the sign, and scathed. As the engine roared to life and she sped down Highway 6, Allison didn't dare check the rearview mirror. She knew, somehow, that if she looked back, the motel would still be there, closer than it should be, waiting.